And welcome back. I'm going to continue reading Transforming the Mind. We are on the 4 Seals of Buddhism. I mentioned earlier that it is a basic fact of life that we all naturally and instinctively desire to be happy and overcome suffering. The wish to be happy is fundamental to all of us. As to why this is so, perhaps we can simply say that's the way it is. Although we all have this natural aspiration, however, and although that we long for is happiness, it is also a natural fact that over and over again we undergo painful experiences and face suffering of various kinds. So why is this? Why, despite our deep desire to be happy, are we constantly confronted with suffering and pain instead? From the Buddhist point of view, the reason is that we have certain fundamentally flawed ways of perceiving and relating to ourselves and to the world. At the root of this lie what Buddhists identifies as 4 false views. The first is to view things and events, which are in reality impermanent and transient, as eternal, permanent, and unchanging. The second is to view things and events, which are actually sources of dissatisfaction and suffering, as pleasurable and as true sources of happiness. The third false view is that we often tend to apprehend as pure and desirable things, which are in reality impure. And the fourth false view is our tendency to project a notion of real existence upon events and things which in reality lack any such anonymity. Fundamentally flawed views of reality lead to certain false ways of relating to the world and to oneself, which in turn lead to confusion, misery, and suffering. On the basis of this dynamic, Buddhism formulates what are known as the 4 Seals, a set of axioms which are common to all schools of Buddhism. The 4 Seals are: 1. All composite phenomena are impermanent. 2. All contaminated phenomena are unsatisfactory. 3. All phenomena are devoid of self-existence. And 4. Nirvana is true peace. 1. All composite phenomena are impermanent. One of the fundamental insights of Buddhism is the understanding that all things are impermanent. This is the first of the 4 Seals. The point here is that all things that arise from cause and conditions are impermanent and are in a process of conditional flux. As far as the gross level of impermanence is concerned, we are all aware of how certain things come to an end, how things go through a process of change, and so on. But the Buddhists would take this further and argue that underlying the perceptible changes that we can all observe, there must be a subtler level of change, a process that may not be so evident. If we are to account for the observable changes that happen over a longer period of time, we should, in principle, be able to trace the process down to the smallest conceivable unit of time. Logically, then, even within a minute point of time, there is a constant and dynamic process. Everything is going through this subtle process of change, even from one moment to the next. Therefore, we can reason that anything that arises as a result of cause and condition is, by nature, impermanent. In other words, anything that is conditioned must be transient. Once you understand this fundamental point, then you can begin to see the happiness that we all aspire to achieve and the suffering that we all instinctively want to avoid are themselves experiencing that result from cause and conditions. Happiness and suffering do not come from nowhere. They arise as a result of their own cause and condition. This very fact suggests that although, for example, you may now be going through a painful experience or even intense suffering, the very fact that your experience is conditioned means that it will pass. In this way, we come to realize that both happiness and suffering are subject to change and are impermanent. in terms of their transient nature, then there is a parity between happiness and suffering. Number 2, all contaminated phenomena are unsatisfactory. The second seal points out the difference between happiness and suffering and states that all contaminated phenomena are fundamentally unsatisfactory. The implication is that those things that do not arise from such contaminated causes can be satisfying and fulfilling. When we talk about contaminated phenomena in this content, we are referring to events and experiences that arise under the power of negative impulses or affective thoughts and emotions. They are called contaminated because they are tainted by the pollutants of the mind. This is why they are fundamentally unsatisfying, and why their nature is said to be dukkha, or suffering. The second axiom does not simply refer to those physical sensations that we can all readily label as pain and suffering. Of course, the wish to be free of suffering is common to all of us, but there are different ways of understanding what suffering is, depending on one's level of awareness. When Buddhists speak about overcoming suffering, especially in the content of the second seal, we are referring to a very subtle level of suffering. Those who are familiar with the way Buddhism classifies the various types of suffering will know that 3 levels are identified: the suffering, the suffering of change, and the suffering of pervasive conditioning. It is this 3rd level of suffering that we are dealing with in the second seal. As I mentioned, one of the implications of this second axiom is that if we are free of mental pollutants, then we can gain the lasting, genuine happiness that we long for. The question is, why is the nature of the pollutants such that they render a particular experience one of suffering? And is it possible to overcome these pollutants, these negative thoughts and emotions? Mental pollutants or affective thoughts and emotions refer to a whole class of thoughts and emotions that are affective by nature. The etymology of the Tibetan word nyan mong suggests that something that afflicts us from within. Afflicting meaning that it causes suffering and pain. The point here is that at the root of all our suffering, at the subtlest level, lie the afflictions of the mind. Negative impulses, negative thoughts and emotions, and so forth. This suggests that the root of suffering lies within us, and the root of happiness also lies within us. The key insight we draw from this is that the degree to which we are able to discipline our mind is what determines whether we are happy or whether we suffer. A disciplined state of mind, a spiritually transformed state of mind, leads to happiness, whereas an undisciplined state of mind that is under the power of affliction leads to suffering. We can now combine together our contemplations on these first 2 seals. From the first seal, that all composite phenomena are impermanent, we gain the insight that anything that comes into being as a result of cause and condition is not only dependent on other factors for its existence, but also exists within a process of continual change with no real power to stand on its own. Furthermore, the process of change does not itself require any other 3rd factor to put it into motion. Rather, the causes and conditions that give rise to the origination of a thing that are very causes and conditions that also plant the seed for its cessation. To summarize, whatever is conditions lacks any independent power of its own. It is therefore called ether-powered, and is determined by forces other than itself. Now, if we combine that insight with the second seal, we realize that anything that arises as a result of contaminated causes and conditions, the mental pollutants, is fundamentally unsatisfactory, and is under the power of these pollutants. By reflecting in this way, we come to recognize the fact that we allow ourselves to be ruled and controlled by our thoughts and emotions, and furthermore, that we allow our thoughts and emotions to be determined by our negative impulses and other afflictions of the mind. We therefore begin to realize that if we continue to allow this situation to occur, it can only lead to misery and suffering. By thinking along these lines, we will come to see our afflictive emotions and thoughts as truly destructive forces. Whatever brings disaster or harm should be called an enemy. So this means that the ultimate enemy is actually within ourselves. This makes things so difficult. If our enemy is out there, outside, we can try to run away or hide. We might even be able to deceive him sometimes. But if the enemy is within ourselves, it is so difficult to know what to do. So the crucial question for a spiritual practitioner is whether or not it is possible for this inner enemy to be overcome. This is also our main challenge. If it is the case, as suggested by some ancient philosophers, that the pollutants lie in the very nature of consciousness itself and are inseparable from it, then so long as consciousness exists, these pollutants will exist as an essential characteristic of our mind. This implies that there is no possibility of overcoming them. If this were true, I would personally rather be a hedonist. I wouldn't make any effort to follow a spiritual path, but would seek solace in alcohol or maybe some other substance and forget about the whole idea of spiritual training. Also, I would not bother to engage in these probing physiological questions. Maybe after all, that is the best way to be happy. If you compare human beings with animals, for example, sometimes we humans are so caught up in our imagination and thinking that we create our own complications, while animals who do not indulge in these intellectual activities can seem quite content, calm, and relaxed. They eat, and when they are well fed, they sleep, and then they relax. From one point of view, they seem to be much more content than we are. The question brings us to the third seal. 3. All phenomena are devoid of self-existence. The third axiom, that all phenomena are empty and are devoid of self-existence, should not be understood in a nihilistic way. You should not think about the Buddhist teaching state that in the final analysis, nothing exists. This cannot be the case because, in fact, we are talking about suffering, about happiness, and about the best means to fulfill our aspiration to be happy and overcome suffering. So we are certainly not suggesting that nothing exists. What the third seal does indicate is rather that there is a fundamental disparity between our perception of the world and ourselves and the way things actually are. Things do not exist in the manner in which we tend to believe that they do, as an independent object reality out there. In order to address the question of whether or not negative emotions such as anger, hatred, and so forth really reside in the essential nature of our minds, we examine ourselves and our experiences. Is anger present in every instant of our conscious state? Is hatred there continually all the time? We find that they are not. Sometimes anger arises, sometimes hatred arises, and then they disappear. It is not the case that whenever consciousness is present, these negative emotions are present as well. Anger and hatred do arise, but sometimes their opposites, love and compassion, arise instead. Buddhism infers from this that the basic consciousness is clouded by whatever thoughts and emotions occur at a given moment. I have 5 more pages. We also make the point that two mentally conflicting emotions, like love on the one hand and hatred on the other, cannot coexist in a single instant in the same person. This implies that various thoughts and emotions occur in our mind at different moments, which means that our negative emotions do not reside in us, ever present, inseparable parts of our basic mind. That is why we say that thoughts and emotions arise and then cloud the basic mind. We therefore consider that the basic mind is neutral. It can be influenced by positive thoughts and emotions, or on the other hand, by negative ones. So there are grounds for hope. Now, on the basis of all this reasoning, the big question we must now turn to is whether afflictive emotions can actually be eliminated or not. We saw earlier that change and transformation are possible by virtue of impermanence, which means that there is indeed a possibility of overcoming negative emotions and thoughts. However, the broader and more fundamental question is whether or not it is possible to eliminate these pollutants of mind completely. All schools of Buddhism argue that this is possible, and in fact, in many Buddhist teachings, we find a very extensive discussion of the nature of these afflictions, their destructive potential, their causes and conditions, and so on. The essence of these discussions should be understood in relation to the attempt to eliminate negative impulses altogether. We can, of course, talk about Dharma in the content of ethics, and speak about refraining from killing, from lying, and so forth, and about engaging in virtuous activities. However, this is Dharma only in a very general sense of the word, since ethical guidelines are not particularly unique in the Buddhist teaching. The understanding of spiritual practice that is unique to Buddhism lies in the possibility of the total cessation of negative impulses. This is called nirvana, total relief from and cessation of the afflictions of mind. We could say that nirvana is the essence of Buddha Dharma. For a Buddhist practitioner, all aspects of Dharma practice have to be understood in the light of this ultimate spiritual aim of gaining freedom from the pollutants of mind. This also applies to ethics. Ethical practices being steps towards the goal of liberation, since the ultimate aim of Buddhists is to eradicate all the negative emotions and thoughts that give rise to negative actions. The effort a practitioner makes to lead an ethical way of life indicating his or her commitment to dealing with negative thoughts and emotions. The first stage of this effort is to address the manifestations of these afflictions, namely physical and verbal behavior. When we analyze the nature of our afflictive emotions and thoughts, we see that underlying all of these experiences are certain projections of our mind, certain imagings, which occur irrespective of whatever they have an object basis or not. For example, in an object we consider desirable, we will perceive certain desirable qualities, and we may then exaggerate them through the power of our imagination. We then tend to dwell on them and indulge in them, all of which leads to developing a stronger and stronger attachment to that object of desire. Similarly, when we are confronted by objects that are undesirable, we again tend to project certain characteristics and properties onto them which are above and beyond objective reality, and as a result we will feel repulsed and want to draw away from them. These are the basic drives in operation which we interact with things. Either we feel attracted or we feel repulsed. These drives lead to all the other types of emotional responses that we have to events and objects. So there is a dynamic in process, underlying which is a strong clinging to objects, whether the clinging be expressed through desire or through repulsion. This gives rise to all our afflictions. Within the various Buddhist schools, there are different understandings of the nature of these afflictions and what causes them. Depending on their respective views of the nature of reality, it seems that the more advanced schools of Buddhism have a more profound understanding of our afflictions. For example, the great Indian master Nagarjuna, not sure about that name, sorry if I pronounced it, said that nirvana must be understood as freedom from mental afflictions and from the karmic actions to which they give rise. Suffering is caused by our karmic actions, and these in turn are motivated by the underlying forces of negative thoughts and emotions. These, in their turn, are produced by our projections and imagining, which are themselves rooted in a false perception of reality. The false perception of reality here refers to perceiving things and events as enjoying some kind of object, real, independent existence. According to Master Nagarjuna, insight into emptiness is what really dispels this fundamental ignorance or misperception of the world. So this point relates directly to the third axiom, that all phenomena are empty and devoid of inherent existence. This axiom tells us that although our normal perception leads us to believe that things are permanent and real and enjoy some kind of independent existence, through analysis we find that in reality they lack these qualities. We therefore discover that any perception suggests that things exist inherently and independently is a false perception, and that only insight into emptiness can cut through this misperception and dispel it. Many of the negative thoughts and emotions which take root in our flawed way of viewing reality will therefore be eliminated when this insight is generated and when we see through our perceptions and recognize them to be false. We can now summarize all these points in the following way. By means of personal reflection, we come to realize that the basic mind, or the nature of consciousness, is neutral. It is neither negative nor positive. We also find that many of our negative thoughts and emotions have their root in our fundamentally flawed way of understanding the reality of the world and of ourselves. When we find that insight into emptiness counters such misperception, furthermore, we realize that negative emotions on the one hand and insight on the other directly oppose each other. The difference between them is that the latter is grounded in and supported by valid experiences and reasoning, while the former does not have a valid grounding in either reason or experience. So by bringing all of these points together, we develop a sense that by cultivating insight into emptiness, it is possible to eliminate all our mental afflictions. Number 4, nirvana is true peace. The fourth seal points to the fact that the essential nature of mind is pure and luminous. False perceptions and negative thoughts and emotions do not reside in the essential nature of mind. Given that the afflictions are rooted in false perception, there is an antidote that can eliminate them. This is insight into the emptiness of all things, or true perception of reality. Therefore, emptiness, which is the absence of inherent existence, is sometimes referred to as natural nirvana. It is because the nature of phenomena is empty that true nirvana, true freedom from suffering, is possible. This explains why the Buddhist scriptures present 4 types of nirvana. Natural nirvana, which refers to emptiness, a nirvana with residue, which generally refers to the conditioned physical existence of the individual, nirvana without residue, and finally, non-abiding nirvana. It is on the basis of natural nirvana that all the other levels of nirvana are possible. The precise meaning of nirvana, which residue and without residue, is explained differently by the various schools of Buddhism. Some speak of the residue as the physical aggregates of the individual, while others refer to the residue of dualistic perceptions. The residue of the physical aggregates refers to the physical constituents that the individual has acquired as a result of previous karma. However, I will not go into a detailed discussion of this here. So basically, from the third seal, we realize that the fundamental nature of reality is that it is devoid of inherent existence. All phenomena that result from other factors lack inherent independence. existence. Yet we view them falsely as being anonymous. This misperception lies at the root of much of our confusion and also gives rise to reflective thoughts and emotions. Insight into the nature of reality reveals things as devoid of inherent existence and acts as a direct antidote to false perception and consequently to the afflictions of the mind. The total elimination of all negative thoughts and emotions and their underlying false perceptions is what is meant by nirvana. The Tibetan term for nirvana is Nyang Di, which literally translates as beyond sorrow. In this content, sorrow refers to the affliction of the mind, so nirvana really refers to a state of being that is free from afflictive thoughts and emotions. Nirvana is freedom from suffering and from the causes of suffering. When we perceive nirvana in these terms, we begin to realize what true and genuine happiness really means. We can therefore envisage the possibility of being totally free from suffering. So we can conclude by reiterating that insight into emptiness is what enables us to dispel and eliminate our negative thoughts and emotions, as well as the false perception that underpin them. It is emptiness that all of these pollutants are cleansed and purified. The main point, then, is that a Buddhist understanding of nirvana must be based on an understanding of emptiness. And that's the end of that one. Thank you for listening. Have an awesome day.